Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a review, swatches, and a quick tutorial on the new Anastasia Beverly Hills palette. And this is the palette in collaboration with her daughter Norvina. So I wanted to pick up this eyeshadow palette because it's like more of a cool tone eyeshadow palette. And I don't really have a lot of cool tone palettes in my collection because, I mean, they're just not coming out with a lot of cool tone palettes. So I'm going to show you swatches of the palette as well as a demo of the eyeshadow look that I am wearing today, and give you my thoughts on the palette. But I'm gonna give you my thoughts on the palette, you know, like before I go into the whole eyeshadow look. So if you guys are interested in seeing my thoughts as well as swatches on the new Norvina eyeshadow palette as well as the tutorial, then keep on watching. Alright guys, so today's video is going to be on the new Norvina palette. As you can tell from the title, this palette released yesterday and I think it retails for $42. And I ordered it yesterday and I got it in the mail today. And I think I always get my palette so fast because her warehouse, I think, is like based somewhere in the South and I live in the South. So I always get my palettes really fast. So I ordered the Norvina palette when it came out yesterday, and this is just how it looks. It's purple and it has that same kind of velvety texture as the Modern Renaissance, the Culture, Soft Glam, you know, the Prism palette, those same type of textures. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into showing you how the inside of the palette looks. So this is how the inside of the palette looks. Some very pretty colors. These colors look a lot darker in person. I thought that they weren't going to be dark enough, but they look a lot darker in person. Now getting on to what everyone wants to know, of course, there is a lot of kick up in this palette, but kick up doesn't bother me because I always do my eyeshadow last. So, I mean, that part really doesn't bother me. But with the matte shades, you really do have a lot of fallout. You know, you just have to tap your brush in lightly or you will get too much product on your brush because these shadows are super pigmented. I didn't have any problems with blending any of the shadows. The shimmer shadows are very creamy, but they do have a little kick up as well. I had a little fallout on my face from the from Celestial, the purple shadow. When I applied this into the lid, I got a little fallout on my face, but it wasn't really anything too crazy. But that's just about it. I mean, they blend really nicely. They don't look ashy on the skin when you apply them to your eyes. Like, it's a really, really nice palette. And I also dipped into one of my single shadows in Noir because I wanted to kind of smoke out the outer V. So in this shade, the kind of chocolate shade in the palette, this shade is really not deep enough for me to, you know, smoke out my outer V, which it worked really nice in my crease, but it's really not deep enough for me to smoke out the outer V. So I did go into Noir, and I had that in a single eyeshadow, and that's about it. So yeah, the palette is really nice. I really love the color scheme of this palette. I did show you side-by-side comparisons to all of their latest palettes that they released in my swatch, in the little swatch demo. So just in case anyone wanted to see that. So yeah, this is how the palette looks. I absolutely love the palette. Like I said, there is a lot of kick up, but they blend really nicely. And you just can't jab your brush in. Like, you have to lightly tap your brush because the lightest tap in the shadows and you get so much product on your brush. So I mean, you only have to tap it really lightly and the pigment shows up right away and they blend so nicely. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the palette. We're going to go ahead and get into the palette. I will leave a link in the description box down below as to where this palette can be ordered. Alright guys, so here is an overview of the front of the palette. And it's this really pretty, like really light lavender shade. It has Norvina written on it in gold. And it's that same velvety texture that all the latest palettes are. So here is the inside of the palette. And the palette does come with the brush. All of their palettes come with the brush. I'm having a hard time getting it out of there. But yeah, there's the brush that the palette comes with. Or that comes with the palette. So here is just an overview of the palette. And now I'm just going to swatch the palette for you guys. Alright, so I'm going to start right here and go over. I'm going to start with the front row. and this shade is Dreamer. Next up is the shade Summer, and my swatches are really crazy, so please forgive that. Alright, the next shade is Wild Child, and as you can see, these metallics are super intense. Next up we have Rose Gold, which is my favorite shade in the palette. Look how metallic that is. And I didn't even wet my brush when I put this on my eyes. Next up we have Celestial. And I did have a little trouble with getting this one to come through. It swatches really nicely, but I did have to wet my brush to get it to show up how I wanted it. Next we have Dazzling. And the last shimmer in the palette is Drama. And this is a gorgeous deep purple. So this is the first row swatched, all of these shimmers. And I'm just going to wipe off my fingers and come back and do the bottom row. Alright, next up for the bottom row we have the first shadow, which is Base, and it's just like a really pretty bone shade. As you can see, this shadow swatch is really intense, like it's a really nice brow bone shade, and I used it to set my primer as well. Next we have Soul, and you see how nice these are swatching, and they are not ashy at all. Next we have the shade Incense, which is pretty much the color of my skin tone. I mean, well, I didn't use this shade today, but I mean, I would just imagine this would be just like a transition shade, a blending shade for me. Next we have Volatile. No, I'm sorry, Love. That's the shade Love. Now we have the shade Volatile. Alright, next up is the shade Eccentric. And the last shade in the palette is Passion. So there are all of the matte shades, and then we have all the shimmers. And here are all of the swatches. Sorry, I was like having trouble holding my arm down there to get the swatches to focus. So yeah. So these are the swatches, and then I'm just going to show you the palette in comparison to the other palettes. So I know some people may want to see that. So here's just an overview of the palette one last time. And now I'm going to get on to the comparison of all the other palettes. So here we have the Norvina palette, the Modern Renaissance palette, and the Soft Glam palette. So these are all those palettes side by side. I really like the Norvina palette. I feel like this palette is cool tone. It's way different from their other palettes. And so, I mean, this just to show you all of them, I'm just adding in the Subculture palette and the Prism palette. Alright, so here is the Norvina palette, the Soft Glam and Modern Renaissance, the Subculture, and the Prism palette. So this is just all of the palettes together. And now we're going to get on to the eyeshadow tutorial. First up, I'm starting out with my brows already done, and I'm going to use my Urban Decay eyeshadow primer potion in the shade Caffeine. Alright, next up, going into the palette, I'm going to use the shade Base, which is that really nice bone shade, and I'm going to use that to set my primer in place. And then I'm going to go in with the shade Eccentric, and that is like the orangey shade in the palette, and you see how really nice and pigmented these shadows show up. I'm really going in with a light hand, like barely tapping my brush in the pan, because I don't want too much kick up, even though it doesn't bother me. That's why I do my base first. But the shadows do have some kick up, but I mean, if you pick up too much product, it'll be really hard to blend out. So it's easier to just start off with, you know, less shadow and build your way up. Alright, so now I'm going to go into the shade Passion now that I have the Eccentric shade build up to my liking. And I'm going to apply Passion directly in the crease, and I'm just trying to add a little more definition to the crease. Alright, next up, going into the shade Volatile, and I'm going to add this shade directly in the crease. Also, I'm just trying to get this shade the crease a little deeper, because I am going to be doing a cut crease. Alright, next up, I'm going to be using my Anastasia concealer in the shade 5.0, and I'm going to use this to cut my crease. Alright, next I'm going into the shade Rose Gold, and this is my favorite shade in the palette. I love Rose Gold. I'm just going to place this on the inner portion of the lid. And the color shows up really nice and metallic, and I haven't wet my brush. Alright, next up, going into the shade Celestial, I'm going to place this all over the rest of the lid, well, the middle portion. And I mean, it's showing up nice, but I wanted it to show up a little more metallic, so I decided to wet my brush. And you know, I think the color showed up a lot more pigmented when I wet my brush. Alright, next up, going into a Anastasia single shadow in the shade Noir. I'm just going to add this on the outer V. That's because the darkest shade in the palette really wasn't dark enough for me to smoke out the outer V with, so I just went into a single shadow. And I'm just going to place this shadow down and then blend it out. Next up, going into the shade Soul. I wanted to work with that, so I'm placing that right in the middle between my outer V shade and the Celestial shade, just for blending. And then I'm using the matte bone shadow, which is Base, and I'm using this to highlight my brow bone, even though I'm going to put some shimmer on it later. Alright, next I'm going into my Lancome eyeliner, and I'm going to give myself a line just to hide my lash band. And then I'm going to add some lashes, and I'm going to be adding the Cocoa Lashes in the Style Goddess. I'm just going to finish my face off camera and come back and finish my eyes. Alright guys, so my face is done, and now for my bottom lash line, I'm just adding the shade Eccentric. And then I'm going into the shade Celestial, and I'm just going to pack that all over the bottom lash line. I'm pretty much using this shade for the majority because I wanted that bottom lash line to be purple. So I'm just placing this all over the bottom lash line. And to deepen up the outer part of the bottom lash line, I'm just going to go in with the shade Drama. And that's that really pretty deep purple in the palette. Alright, next up, going into the shade Dreamer. I was going to put this in my inner tear duct, but I wasn't liking how it was looking, so I decided to add this on my brow bone. And then I'm going to go into my Anastasia Aurora palette, which you really can't see because of my lighting. But I'm going to use that purple shade right there, and I'm going to place that in my inner tear duct. Alright, next up, going into my glow kit in the shade Sweets. I'm going to use the shade, I think, Toffee. I was going to mix the two, but I ended up going with Toffee, so I'm just going to use Toffee to highlight. It's Toffee or Taffy, I'm not sure. I don't have the palette right in front of me. Alright, next up, moving on to my lips, I'm going to be using just any brown lip liner you have. I'm using the Shea Moisture lip liner in the shade Dark Brown, and I'm using my Anastasia liquid lipstick in the shade Stripped. Alright, and that completes the look. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos from me. Until the next video.